Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today, and we're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And today's guest is Zane Burke. He's CEO at Quantum Health. Welcome, Zane.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, so looking forward to the discussion. You have a long history of health IT. We're going to cover a lot of topics, but for those that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and also Quantum Health.
So I've been in healthcare IT for over 25 plus years, and previously at Cerner and Livongo, and now at Quantum Health, where we're really doing a different kind of service, which is healthcare navigation and really connecting in the only place that I know of, members, the payer, and the provider.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, care navigation to me, it just seems like it's becoming increasingly important and valued by so many people. What do you think is really driving this trend, and what do you see happening in this space in the future?
Well, I think what's driving the trend is that healthcare is getting more and more complex all the time instead of simpler. And it's fascinating because while many digital tools have made certain parts of healthcare a little bit better or made the experience a little bit better, they're siloed in and of themselves. And so we're seeing more and more silos in healthcare, whether it's the data, whether it's the service, it's more of those silos. And what healthcare navigation, when it's done right, can do is really be the connective tissue between the clicks and mortar world and really create that kind of connectivity to help people manage through their healthcare journeys. And it turns out that actually doing the right thing to create better experiences saves money. So the reason I look at healthcare navigation as a really hot spot to be is because the need has never been greater.
Your point is really interesting. I'm trying to think if there's ever been an example where it actually simplified the healthcare experience. I think we have with very specific experiences, but never where do I go for care? You know, it's always like an add-on. It doesn't replace a bunch of services. It's like, oh, now we have convenient care along with urgent care, along with telehealth, along with primary care, along with ED, along with where do I go, right? Like, it's crazy how that happened, right?
It really is, and each one of those things in and of themselves makes sense. You think about whether it's telehealth, that's a better convenience for consumers, or if it's a digital health solution, like whether it's something around diabetes management or hypertension or chronic kidney conditions, each one of those might help in that little instance. But then when you try to take it outside of that and put it into the full continuum of care, we made it more complex.
Yeah.
And the not just the data, but the reimbursement, the next place I should go, and the more complex the journey, the harder it is for people to manage through that.
Yeah, let's not even start on reimbursement complexity. So, how is Quantum Health really approaching this problem? What are you doing? How can you help people with this?
Yeah, so because that complexity is there, what we're able to do is really put all the stakeholders together. So we work primarily with large self-insured employers to create a better healthcare experience for their members. So our net promoter scores are in the mid 70s. If you're familiar with net promoter scores, that's kind of off the charts world. But we also provide a connectivity to the providers as well. And we're the only company that does that. And the providers actually love our services as well. So they're in the high 60s. When was the last time you heard a doc that loved engaging with on that side?
Yeah, maybe direct primary care, but the only one I've seen.
and then we're connecting that back to the payer or the large self-insured employer who's been footing the bill for all this time without any notion for quality or effectiveness of the care at the end of the day. And so we have all the data. So we take all the claims data, we take all the digital asset data. So we partner with over 500 different digital health players along the way to get the algorithms, get the data. And then we're acting in the life flow of the member to really create the journey that gives them a better experience, actually lowers their costs from a out-of-pocket cost perspective, as well as it turns out doing the right thing lowers the costs for our clients at the end of the day. And so it's really that combination of the data, the artificial intelligence with the human touch at the end of the day. And I like to say with love and care,
Mm.
that we actually can provide a better and unique kind of a service offering for our clients.
Love and care as opposed to a cog in the machine. That's a that's how I would describe it.
It's funny. It was a very purposeful piece. It's been part of the culture of quantum health, but when you really think about what makes this different, it's really how do we provide love and care in the healthcare journey, and that's no matter whether it's the member, so the patient, or whether that's the provider, because the provider actually doesn't get a lot of love and care these days. And so how do we help them? And if you think back on it for a large self-insured employer, if you're a benefits person, you're in HR, you've been just pummeled over the last couple of years with the Great Resignation, hybrid workforce, working from home, rising costs, all these things. And so how do we make their life easier in HR to actually administer the best kind of benefits possible? Mm-hmm. So it's really that love and care to all the constituents is really something we live by.
Yeah. And to be fair, there's a lot of love and care from providers, I think, in healthcare, but just not reimbursement and paid for it. Another topic that I thought was interesting as we kind of prepped for this interview was thinking about inflation. How do you see inflation really, affecting healthcare? Other than obviously it's raising the cost of everything from procedures to medications. How do you think it's going to impact healthcare?
Well, obviously, you mentioned that we're seeing costs go up significantly, and coming off of the COVID years where we had some declines based on less usage, it's quite a shock to the system, if you will, and seeing both inflation and usage going up at the same time.
That's true.
And so you're seeing a couple of things, really some interesting dynamics. And so if you're the person paying the bill, in the case of most of my clients, large self-insured employers, they are having to think through, am I really getting value from these benefits? Am I really getting real hard ROI, clinical outcomes? Are my members, are my employees getting high engagement? So do they actually use this service, or is this just something that we announce once a year and people don't know that they have it, and so it's really a kind of a wasted benefit. So what I would tell you is there is a huge focus on true ROI, on true clinical outcomes, and on engagement. And so I think that's what you're going to see in terms of what happens in kind of the digital health world in particular, is if you're not providing real value, it's going to be very, very challenging time period for you. The nice to have time period is not going to be there.
Yeah, I think a focus around engagement is really interesting as well, especially with us all burnt out, not just healthcare, as well. What other complexities are you kind of keeping an eye on that you think are a challenge for healthcare that we should be looking at addressing?
Well, I think these increasing silos, we've really got to address that and create whether it's creating these little islands of data, creating processes to enable, whether it's insurance companies, as we have known them in the past. Nobody has a great experience on that side. And so it's really the silos that is really the killer. So how do we create more, what I have to call the connective tissue pieces here, and think about these in holistic ways? Because it's not going to be an all virtual world everywhere, as much as many of my contemporaries would like it to be. Virtual is great from a convenience perspective, but that's just part of the journey. It's got to be, how do you connect what I often say was the clicks and mortar world, and how do we put that all together? And ultimately, we are going to have to get to that thing you don't want to get to, John, which is the reimbursement side of this, which is we have to attack the reimbursement side to say, what will be the right long-term outcomes here? And so kind of the silos and the reimbursement pieces are where I think we've really got to focus our attentions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how you highlighted it, you have to integrate with 500 digital health apps, right? I mean, 500 silos, if you will, right?
Right.
It's gotten better, but obviously you're able to integrate with 500. 5 years ago, I'm not sure we could say that, right?
So the good news is most of the digital health solutions have been built on contemporary architectures.
Mhm.
And there's when people can see we can aid the journey, those digital health providers have been willing to open up their architectures and really have the data flow, and the data flow both ways, and that works for our data going back towards their solutions as well. So it's really you really have to have this true notion of that interoperability where it got used very carefully, lackadaisically here over the
Sure.
last 7 years or so, mostly around EHRs. But if you think about a lot of this is outside of that world, and so how can we integrate beyond that space? And we're fortunate to be in a position to be able to put those pieces together kind of uniquely. And kind of the fun part for me is what I saw when I came to quantum health was this opportunity to take the data and really, I'll say, weaponize it on behalf of the member. And what I could see was really that we had we know which solutions work and which ones don't. So by the data, we actually know what the engagement looks like by the data. And because our care navigation service is happening when the member wants that service, we can engage in the life flow of that member and really help them in that journey. So I'm having a ton of fun doing it. But there's a lot more to go do in this space to really create that full connective tissue.
Yeah, that's fair. So, you've mentioned virtual care, telehealth a few times. You literally had a front row seat to the virtual care's explosion at Livongo, right? Obviously acquired by Teladoc, and now obviously the cratering, which I'm sure you were glad to not be part of. But I mean, some of it was to be expected, right? It was virtual care has fallen off because the pandemic forced that explosion, right? But what do you see as kind of that future of virtual care? What's it going to look like?
Well, there's a lot there. Virtual care, I think, it's part of our ongoing future. And so, I mean, I think that's a way to engage with people. And I often say this: nobody does healthcare because they want to do healthcare.
Yeah.
We do healthcare because you want to spend time with your family, or you want to play an instrument, or you want to go to a concert, or you want to go to dinner, or drink a glass of wine, whatever that is. That's why you're doing healthcare. You're not doing healthcare for healthcare's sake. And I think what you see in the virtual world is, how do you make those encounters such that you create better experiences that we can afford the healthcare that allows us to go do the things that we really want to go do. And so I think I'm a huge believer in virtual care. Obviously, I invested in several years in it at Livongo. I'm happy to have a dialogue about what I think is works or doesn't work on that, kind of in that side. I don't think virtual care tailed off. What I think is, obviously we hit a fast forward button.
Sure.
Where I can remember being in February of 2020 and trying to evangelize virtual care. And then obviously we hit the pandemic, and all of a sudden, I think it was 45 days into the pandemic, I'm like, oh heck, everybody is going to figure out virtual care is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And it was 45 days past that Teladoc came calling upon us at Livongo. And I think there are some company specific elements to why that may not appear on the surface to be as productive as it really has been or could be for that organization. But I am super bullish on virtual care for the long term, but it's going to be part of the expectation. And so I think that's an expectation that everybody has, that if you went back 2 years ago, people didn't have. You didn't have that expectation out of your primary care physician. But what I'll say in my current world at Quantum, 73% of telehealth visits are with the primary care physician, not through the commoditized telehealth service, but with their own primary care physician. So think about the change that occurred with primary care.
Yeah.
And with healthcare overall, we went from, we had physicians that were totally against doing video visits to it's a condition of doing business.
Yeah. Well, and that's the big culture change that happened, right? Is they didn't have to. I always said it's a value equation. The value was always there for the patient, but it wasn't there for the doctor. And now, then the value equation changed. Do you want to see patients, or do you not want to see them at all? That's what COVID said, and so they saw them.
And then the changes from a government reimbursement perspective were super helpful, and I just saw that got extended this past week, which I think is super helpful, and I think that's here for the long range as well. I think there's a lot to do, but at the end of the day, healthcare is very personal, and particularly the more complex the journey is, that we can use those commoditized services when it can be a little less personal, and when we're doing transactional healthcare, if you will. I get a routine sinus infection. I call that a transactional healthcare. Yeah. But if I'm on a healthcare journey around cancer or musculoskeletal or behavioral health, that's going to be very personal. And that's where you need the combination of how do I engage on the virtual care side, but also I want to walk in and see that clinician. I want to know that I'm getting the right kind of service. I also want that feeling from my navigation. I want them to know who I am and to think they have my best interests at heart. And the more complex the journey is, the more I need that navigation service throughout that journey. Make sure I'm at the right doctor, getting the second opinions, getting the best kind of care in network, all those kinds of things, understanding all the elements, and having somebody who's looking out for me based off the data, based off the best quality and appropriateness of care.
Yeah. Well, I always say that my orthopedic surgeon's my primary care doctor, but that probably says something about me more than the system. You threw it out there, so I have to ask, like, what modes of virtual care do you think work and which ones don't? I think it's fascinating. Obviously, you've worked through a lot of them. What do you see? I mean, it sounds like primary care obviously has worked quite effectively for many. What other areas do you see work, and what other areas do you think are like, no, we probably won't go virtual on that, at least initially?
I think virtual care can work in most special and most service lines and specialties to a point. And I think again, it's thinking that it's going to be an all virtual world. I think that's the misnomer. Is it's not going to be it can be all virtual if it's transactional. But again, if I'm on a journey and I want to see a specialist, it's pretty likely I'm going to want them. I want to see them. I want to be there. And there are certain things that physician may also want to be able to triage by seeing me in person versus on the video visits. There, you can do a heck of a lot virtually, but to think it's going to be an all virtual world, I think that's not going to be the case. It's that how do you bring together that virtual world and the physical world, and then really how do you have somebody guiding you through that journey?
Well, I mean, that all goes back to the care navigation stuff that you're working on. I saw a discussion yesterday. Someone said, that is the problem, is how do I navigate all these different options? And someone replied and said, the secret sauce is it takes a person. How do you see that, right? I mean, we'd love to AI automate everything in the world. How do you see that, like the AI automation, or even, bots, or, symptom checkers, et cetera? There's lots of options out there versus how much does need a human to help you navigate this world?
Well, I think you can get a lot from the artificial intelligence. You can get a lot from the data in terms of how do we really create the next best action. Some things can be self-service, and I'm a believer in the technology through the self-service and those pieces. But at the end of the day, again, the more complex it is, the more that you want to hear somebody's voice on the other end, the more you need an advocate on your behalf that's looking out for you. And I think many of us have been in that, John, you're in healthcare and I healthcare IT. I'm guessing you get asked in your own family, can you help me navigate XYZ, some condition for a family member?
Yep.
And how often does it happen to you? You're like, I don't know. I've got and you're like me, you have a great network of people,
Yep.
and
Start
contacts.
texting, Facebook messaging.
That's right. But that's where the data can help a whole heck of a lot, because the data can really help inform and what's the next best action here, what's based on my benefit patterns, what's based on what am I eligible for, what's going to be out of pocket, what's the right site of care. All those kinds of things can be assisted through the data themselves. And in fact, one of the most fascinating parts is in our business is using the data around how to, high cost claimants. In 98% of high cost claimants, before somebody spent $1,000, we will have engaged with them.
Mm.
And that to me is the key signal. Is you kind of have to understand, touch everybody, but know what those signals are coming off there that say, this is okay. Zane's not having a sinus infection. He's on a different kind of a healthcare journey.
Mm-hmm.
And we can use the data science to do that. But at the end of the day, if I'm on a one of those kind of healthcare journeys, I'm going to want a person in addition to the data as well. And I don't want to self-serve my way through cancer or MSK or behavioral health.
Yeah.
I'd like to learn as much as possible and then verify that I've got a real human and somebody that's thinking about it on the other end. I'm just a huge believer in that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a study someone did. I think it was diabetics that were discharged from the hospital. They gave them cell phones, actually, so it's a little bit older, and gave it to them, and they saw these incredible results. But what was interesting is they weren't sure if the results were the fact that they were tracking or because they actually talked to a human every day, and it was the loneliness and all that. So it's interesting the value of humanity in healthcare that I think goes it's tough to measure, right? The impact of that. So
It is.
interesting.
It is.
Well, I can't have you here without asking you at least, as a longtime executive at Cerner in your past, and of course now Oracle Cerner with Oracle acquiring Cerner. What's your perspective on that acquisition, and what do you think it means for Cerner and their customers?
Well, it felt like an inevitability given the direction the company had gone over the last few years, which is unfortunate in my view, but having spent 20 plus years at Cerner building the company.
Well, it was tough when Neil left, I think, right? It lost some of the guiding light. That's what it felt like to me.
It did. And we had a really interesting succession planning process for a different podcast day.
Sure.
But what I would say is, we lost a lot of the vision pieces on what it meant to really take it to a different spot. So I think there was an inevitability about the acquisition side of this.
Mm-hmm.
The hope is a joint Oracle and Cerner can really modernize the platform in a meaningful way, and that was something that had been a roadblock for some time, and frankly is across all EHRs. I mean, it's one of the most interesting dynamics ever, where the two leading EHRs are on either 35-year-old technology or 70-year-old technology. And I mean, it's really amazing to me. So I think it's one of those, I think if you're looking for the hope side, is Oracle will be able to, combined Oracle and Cerner can take that into a more contemporary architecture that will ideally lead to better ways to engage with physicians and with patients at the end of the day. My concern on the flip side is, will the super smart Oracle people be so clever that they don't fully have a full appreciation for how complex healthcare is?
Sure.
And so if you throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, it could be a real challenge there. And I think it's too early to know exactly where that heads, but that's what I'll be watching for, and I'll be rooting them on, quite frankly. I mean,
sure, we should all, right?
We should all. Healthcare needs really strong, good EHRs, and and I am concerned about the future of EHRs in the long run. And put insert any name you prefer to you prefer in that space. And I think the long-term current space in EHRs is in a really tricky spot.
Yeah. Well, they said they'll redo it in a year. So, I think it was moved to the cloud of the year, redo the pharmacy. That big promises to the VA. So we'll see how that plays out for sure.
big promises. I'm hopeful that those are factual.
Yeah. Well, they have good engineers, so we'll see.
They do.
We'll see how they roll it out. So, Zane, thanks so much for taking time to talk about a wide variety of things and teaching us more about quantum health as well. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks, Zane.
Thank you so much, John. Enjoyed it.